I'm Tracy Sabol. Tonight on EWTN News Nightly, global gathering. President Joe Biden makes his address at the United Nations. What he had to say about the threat from China. Let's make a deal. Lawmakers battle over spending as a government shutdown draws closer. We're on Capitol Hill. Unexpected shakeup. Analysis of the CCP's changes to its military leadership. And the glory of God. Harvard University welcomes a popular Catholic speaker to its campus. We'll explain these stories and more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you for being with us tonight. Our top story, Azerbaijan has launched a military operation in the contested Nagorno-Karabakh region, targeting Armenian Christians. At least 2 civilians are dead and nearly 24 wounded. One person on the ground says the situation is horrible.
The operation started from the morning and not stopped yet. People realized this was part of the strategy of Azerbaijan government from first day. They put us in blockade 10 months, and now they are putting us in a situation where we are or need to fight or die for our own homeland.
All this after Azerbaijan launched a, quote, anti-terrorist operation on the Nagorno-Karabakh region. Officials in the majority Christian area reported heavy artillery fire and worried that this could escalate into a full-scale war. We go now to Robert Nicholson, president and founder of the Philos Project. Thanks so much for being with us today, Robert. We appreciate it. So tell us more about these military strikes from Azerbaijan. Why are they escalating now, around 10 months after this blockade began?
Well, thanks for having me on. This is a very important issue. As you said, Azerbaijan, a majority Muslim country, has launched an attack on 120,000 Armenian Christians in this contested region of Nagorno-Karabakh. This is an old Armenian region. These are Armenian Christians inside of it. Azerbaijan claims this area as its own. That's not new. What is new is the blockade you mentioned, now 10 months long, and this most recent military operation. Why now? Part of the reason is that the world is distracted. The world right now, world leaders are at the United Nations General Assembly. Of course, we're all focused on the Russian invasion and war in Ukraine. But I would also add to that the perception of weakness in this country, here in the White House. The dictator of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, senses that the United States is not in a position to do much about it and is using its leverage over energy supplies to basically do whatever it wants to do and accomplish its goals at the expense of these Christians.
Robert, what is your biggest concern when it comes to the situation?
My biggest concern is the one that you already mentioned, not only that these people's lives will be affected, likely all of them forced out of their homeland into the Republic of Armenia next door, but also that this situation is going to spin out of control. We're already seeing the Ukraine war. There are other tensions in the region that are spin-offs from what's happening in Ukraine. We have Iran, an emboldened Islamic Republic of Iran, just to the south of Armenia, looking to do what it wants to do in the region. And this conflict is giving all of these actors a pretext for ramping up the stakes. What starts small could turn out to be something very, very big.
Has there been any response from the global community at all about what's happening over there?
There have been a number of articles in the press. The Biden administration, through Secretary Anthony Blinken, Secretary of State, has called this, quote, unacceptable. It remains to be seen whether the United States or any of our allies in Europe, for example, will do anything about it. I mentioned energy resources. One of the reasons why Azerbaijan has been able to, let's say, get away with so much is because it does sit on a large amount of energy supplies, which are at a premium right now with what's happening in Ukraine. Europe, the United States, there are all kinds of reasons why they don't want to rock the boat. But this is a step too far, and I think we as the United States have every reason, every justification for telling our ally, this is one of our allies, enough is enough, and to negotiate a compromise that brings justice to these Armenian Christians who've been needing it for so long.
Robert, we have probably about 30 seconds left or so, but can you give us a snapshot and let folks know what life is like there for Christians in the Nagorno-Karabakh region?
It's a very small region. You're talking about 120,000 people. So this is an area that is smaller than many American cities. These are women, children, men, people who are, for the most part, unarmed and surrounded on every side. The Republic of Armenia, Armenia proper, a country of 3 million people next door, is unable to do much for them. And these people are feeling desperate. There's shelling in their neighborhoods. As you mentioned, a couple of civilians have been killed. We've seen images of children screaming, running. Kids were in school when the attack happened. Parents were running to get their kids from the school, bring them home. It's total chaos and a feeling of being abandoned by the international community, which is why we need to step up and do something.
Robert Nicholson, president and founder of the Fearless Project, thank you so much for coming on to talk to us about this very important subject. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
President Joe Biden today warned of current and future threats during his speech at the United Nations General Assembly. He also directly called out places around the planet where human rights are being violated. This as his own administration has no plans to protect the unborn from abortion. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, good evening to you. President Joe Biden stood on the world stage today to say America will defend democracy. And he's criticized countries like Russia for hurting peace and stability. And meanwhile, his Vice President Kamala Harris was headed off to another college.
President Joe Biden arrives at the UN headquarters in New York to make an appeal.
The United States seeks a more secure, more prosperous, more equitable world for all people, because we know our future is bound to yours.
The president spoke about new challenges like artificial intelligence.
We need to be sure they are used as tools of opportunity, not as weapons of oppression.
And he addressed ongoing issues including concerns with China, North Korea, Iran, and the war in Ukraine.
And it's Russia alone that stands in the way of peace, because Russia's price for peace is Ukraine's capitulation, Ukraine's territory, and Ukraine's children.
President Biden also called Russia irresponsible for shredding long-standing arms control agreements, making the entire world less safe. And he promoted the importance of human rights.
We cannot turn away from abuses, whether in Xinjiang, Tehran, Darfur, or anywhere else.
Meanwhile, Vice President Kamala Harris continues advocating for abortion, today in Reading, Pennsylvania, part of her cross-country Fight for Our Freedoms college tour. But Students for Life told me freedom is the new abortion buzzword.
What's interesting about the Freedom Tour is that the abortion lobby has tainted the word choice by pretending that choosing the death of a child is no big deal. They've tainted the word access by saying access to killing a kid, that's no big deal. Now they're going after the word freedom.
Christy Hamrick also told me in the post-Roe world, the pro-life movement cannot rest on its laurels and that there's a lot of work to do, including restoring a culture of life.
The Democratic Party today is for abortion through all 9 months with taxpayer funding, violating people's conscience rights, and including infanticide. That's their position. And if that's not their position, then they need to disavow everything they've been doing for the last 5 years, because that's how they have voted consistently.
And we also continue to follow the race for the White House. Former President Trump, has confirmed he will skip the second Republican debate scheduled for later this month at the Reagan Library in California. Instead, the former president plans to meet with striking auto workers in Michigan. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Well, in his remarks today, President Joe Biden said the U.S. does not want its relationship with China to tip into conflict, using a more diplomatic tone when it comes to the rivalry between the countries. All right, let's bring in our guest, Stephen Yates. He is a senior fellow and AFPI China Policy Initiative Chair. Steve, great to be with you today. As mentioned, President Biden mentioned China in his speech today at the United Nations. Meantime, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, well, he recently met with China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi in Malta. Now, both sides said the days-long talks were candid and constructive. Steve, what more do we know about those talks, and how important is it to keep these lines of communication open?
Well, keeping the lines of communication open is only as important as what messages are actually being conveyed and what action is being taken upon those discussions. There's been kind of a pattern of the Biden administration sending cabinet-level officials to China to ask for a thaw in relations, a resumption of normal commercial ties, and trying to get China to back away from support for Moscow in its invasion of Ukraine and the threats towards Taiwan. So a lot on the plate, tons of justification to meet. Unfortunately, though, we look like the ardent suitor because the United States keeps seeking these meetings, and China's behavior isn't really measurably changing, and they're not really coming to the United States to ask for improved relations either.
Well, Steve, when do you think President Biden and President Xi will meet, if at all?
Well, the first opportunity, I think, is going to end up being the APEC summit that is hosted in San Francisco. Unfortunately, given kind of the status of crime and whatever else going on in San Francisco, not exactly America's best foot forward to the world for a host city, but it's where leaders have tended to meet on the margins. Oddly, Xi Jinping, China's leader, has skipped a couple of opportunities like the recent G20. And so it remains to be determined. Does he come? Does he send someone else in his place? I'm certain that that was among the things that National Security Advisor Sullivan was talking to his Chinese counterpart about.
And what would you like to see the Biden administration do in this instance? I mean, how do you think they should be handling China?
Well, first and foremost, I think it's fine to signal an openness for talks, but I don't think you want to make us look desperate as a country by repeatedly knocking on a door where it's unrequited love. And so I think that the Biden administration needs to say, here are the priority issues that we want progress on, and let's see some movement before we have another meeting or take another move on policy. I think pushing them to pull back on the threats against Taiwan is pretty important given the number of military exercises that have been taking place in that theater, something that Americans are aware of, but I think they don't have a sense of how much more important that is than what they're witnessing in Ukraine, even though that matters too.
Yeah, speaking of China's military, I want to talk about this now. China's defense minister has not been seen in public for more than about 2 weeks now. And late last week, the country's foreign minister did not directly answer questions about his whereabouts. What does this signal?
Well, it's an oddity of the communist system where officials will just get, quote unquote, disappeared. This happened with the recent past foreign minister. It came to light that he'd had an affair that was ongoing through his entire time in D.C. when he was ambassador and continued when he was foreign minister. There's no indication of what exactly the problem was with the minister of defense, but the leader of the Communist Party, Xi Jinping, has had a number of these things, not just these two officials. So it's an embarrassment to him having proteges get disappeared because of being under a cloud of suspicion. It's also conspicuous given the national security tensions. But I would emphasize that it's the party that's in charge of China's military. And so these changes don't actually change what their military operations would be.
Steve, we're going to leave it right there. Thank you so much. Always great to be with you and get your insights. Appreciate it. Here in the United States, the potential government shutdown is drawing closer by the minute. Some progress was made over the weekend. A group of House Republicans came to terms on a short-term funding bill. However, many in the party say they won't support it. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales joins us now with the latest on the talks. Eric.
Well, good evening, Tracy. Yes, the clock is ticking. It's hard to believe, but there are only 10 days left for lawmakers to try to prevent the government from shutting its doors. Now, over the weekend, 6 Republicans on the House did strike up a deal on a short-term spending plan, but it's hard to believe that they're still voting on it right now. And the question remains on, will the rest of the GOP conference vote for it?
If you're not willing to pass appropriation bills and you're not willing to pass a continuing resolution to allow you to pass the rest of appropriation bills, and you don't want an omnibus, I don't quite know what you want.
The agreement calls for a month-long continuing resolution until the end of October, plus the GOP border security package, which ends catch and release, restarts the Trump-era Remain in Mexico policy, and resumes construction of the border wall. Plus,
importantly, the CR includes cuts non-discretionary spending by 8%. It fully funds the disaster relief fund and includes language to give the DoD much-needed flexibility for the duration of the CR.
Some House conservatives are already giving it the thumbs down, along with the entire Democratic caucus. Other Republicans say Speaker McCarthy will need bipartisan support to get it passed.
I do think that Kevin McCarthy, the only way to get rid of the issue that he's facing, trying to make sure the government doesn't shut down, is to have Democrat votes. And if he gets Democrat votes, that's going to really start the whole motion to vacate process.
Kevin McCarthy's problem is his own conference and the deals that he's made that are now collapsing, and they're collapsing at the expense of the American people who need him to keep government open and functioning.
Even if it does pass the House, the CR will likely be killed in the Democratic-led Senate, which means Congress isn't any closer to stopping a potential government shutdown.
This Freedom Caucus wish list is not a serious proposal for avoiding a government shutdown, and if passed, would never have enough votes to make it through the Senate.
And we've just learned that Speaker McCarthy has delayed a procedural vote on the CR. Now, Republicans still are eyeing Thursday possibly to pass it, but it's still got to get past the Rules Committee. Speaker McCarthy says that lawmakers will stay throughout the weekend to get it done. Now, earlier today, the House did vote on the defense spending part of the bill, but it failed after 5 GOP lawmakers voted against it. So it could be a very long weekend. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
And we have a lot more still to come here on EWTN News Nightly, including abortion in America. Pro-lifers sound the alarm over a troubling new app. And learn more about the first Christians in Europe. Teens in Washington state created an app to help women from out of state seeking abortions find housing. The girls who developed the platform were just 12 and 14 years old. It is a story that is raising concern among a number of pro-life groups, including Every Life. And here to talk more about the story is Michael Sievert, co-founder of Every Life. He is also the founder of Public Square, a conservative option to Amazon. Michael, great to be with you today. I'm curious, what went through your mind when you heard about this story?
Well, frankly, sadness. That was the first thing that I felt, because I recognized through this story how far our country has fallen. When I was 12 years old, I was making science experiments to display in the school gymnasium that looked like poorly made volcanoes out of paper mache. That's what we were focusing on. We were trying to figure out how you could have a potato power a clock. And yet now you have 12 and 14-year-old girls developing software that mimics Airbnb in order to help people get abortions. I mean, it's startling. At 12 years old, we weren't talking about abortion. We weren't focused on this issue. Our country had a broad recognition and value for life and the miracle of every life. And you wouldn't have dared to speak to your child, certainly other people's children, in a way that would confront that beauty of life. So I was sad more than anything else hearing this story. I think it's a wake-up call for everyone.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, I mean, these girls are so young, 12 and 14, that's middle school age. Do you think these girls even really understand the grave nature of abortion? And also, I mean, where do you think they're learning about this? Why would the school even allow it?
Well, it's a great question. I actually hold the adults responsible for this one, because you're right. At 12 and 14 years old, there's no way that you can understand the gravity of an issue like abortion. And by the way, you can tell that they don't understand the issue of abortion given their comments. When they were asked by reporters how they felt about this grand achievement, because they won an award for this app, they responded with things like, we're so happy to be able to provide women a choice. We're glad to be able to provide for girls' health care. They do not even seemingly understand that the abortion is the ending of an innocent life. It is not health care. It's the very opposite. But you know that they had adults that were cheering this behavior on and actually had even created incentive structure around promoting abortion. The reason they created this app initially was for a contest. They had a STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, competition where young people would create technology that they would submit in order to win cash prizes. So there were adults that sponsored this contest that encouraged these girls to make an app that funds and supports abortion, and then they received cash for making that app. the absolute audacity of adults to forward this project in that manner is startling.
Michael, what do you think this says, about our culture, that these girls so young would create a platform like this to essentially promote abortion?
Well, I think it says a few things, but most notably, it shows that the young generation is incredibly vulnerable to the messages that they are facing day in and day out through the education system, pop culture, entertainment, TikTok. If you're a 12-year-old today, it's very likely in the United States that you are hearing hyper-politicized, indoctrinating messaging throughout the course of your day from multiple entities that you're supposed to be able to trust. You're supposed to be able to trust your teachers. You're supposed to be able to trust the leaders in society. And yet, many of the leaders of our society have, filled with malicious intent, gone after the next generation in order to create future political pawns. Because what it says more than anything else is that our young generation is vulnerable. They are going to be the leaders of tomorrow. These 12 and 14-year-olds clearly are smart. They clearly have a lot of technological abilities. They clearly have an opportunity to do great things in this world. But if those in our society that want to cause harm, that want to lead to more abortions and more destruction, can co-opt that younger generation and all that energy and excitement for the future and utilize it for their political purposes, we have a dark road ahead. And so my big takeaway from this is, man, we really need to fight for the next generation. We really need to make sure that a culture of life is established amongst the next generation, and that we go back to the simple truths. That people are valuable, that life matters, that every life is a miracle. Those are the truths that adults need to be responsible for protecting and cherishing amongst the next generation. And I hope and pray that it happens more, especially as we see stories like this.
Yeah, and Michael, thank you so much for weighing in. We really appreciate it. God bless you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Up next on EWTN News Nightly, Truth in Tradition, a new effort to revive the faith in Northern Europe. Plus, Bishop Robert Barron shares an encouraging message at a top Ivy League school. An event in Sweden is examining the deep Christian roots of Europe. The EWTN Gotland Forum drew clergy members and lay people to an island in Sweden filled with ancient ruins, including many churches. Joining us now is Father Elias Ledz, co-founder of Gotland Forum. Father, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it. So what is the purpose of this forum?
Great to be with you, Tracy, first of all. Well, a forum is always a place where people exchange their knowledge and their experience, that's first of all. And Ulf Silverling, the founder of EWTN in Sweden, and me, we had lively discussions. And we figured out that there is an enormous crisis in our Christianity in Northern Europe. And that people, especially young people, are longing for something that is tradition, that is authentic. So we want to help them discover their true ancestors. Not the ancestors that were reinvented by Hollywood or by computer games, but the Vikings and the Varangians, the Northern Europeans, as they really were, and as they really became when they became Christians.
And Father, I'm curious, why did you decide to organize this forum now?
There's an immense ignorance in the West about Christianity in Middle and Eastern Europe, and also about the influence that the Vikings, the Northern Europeans, the Scandinavians had on that. And in Northern Europe itself, in Scandinavia, there is a spiritual crisis because it's a very secularized society. And very often the hunger for a past, a living past, is filled up with films and stories about a past that never existed. The Viking past is either seen as something incredibly savage and violent, or it is idealized as the true freedom that existed before the coming of this tyranny called Christianity. And those are totally false images of the past. We want to rediscover that we don't just have a tradition, we have living ancestors. And if you are conservative, that's not enough. You don't preserve, you don't conserve but we are called to fructify, to make bear fruit today what we received from our ancestors.
Father, before I let you go, quickly, I know this may seem like a big question, but looking forward, how do you think Christianity can be revived in Europe? And also, are you thinking about maybe hosting this forum again?
Well, of course, I hope to have this forum again. I'll give you a bit of personal opinion about what I think is lacking in the re-evangelization of Europe, is that very often Christianity has a very special kind of decadence. It means a Christianity without religion. It means a Christianity with lots of mercy, but no truth or justice. I find always the term inclusive very dangerous, because if you want to include everything, you don't give a fair choice to people whether they want to belong or not to your community. And I think it's very important, if we want to really rediscover the transcendent, the vertical nature of our Christian faith. Christ is the Son of God. He is God. We have to return to that very basic instinct of man. He wants to adore.
Father Elias Leds, co-founder of Gotland Forum, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. God bless you.
Thank you very much.
Finally tonight, around 1,000 people attended a talk at Harvard University over the weekend. It was given by a Catholic bishop. Bishop Robert Barron discussed the secular world. He focused on the image of God and how those who find him threatening are less likely to pursue a relationship with him. The head of the Diocese of Winona-Rochester in Minnesota countered. He said, quote, "The world is most itself when it has found a relationship to the supreme good, which is God." Now, we thank you for watching tonight. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, X, and Instagram at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Tracy Sabol. Good night, and God bless.